This is not a dream.
Uh-oh.
Ready, go!
Oh!
Oh my god.
Oh yeah.
No, 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 no.
Huh? 3, 2, 1.
So I went to bed at around 3:30 in the morning, I would say. I expected to only sleep for a few hours. And then I'd be able to do some more studying for my Spanish test. Regarding lessons 13 and 14. But I ended up getting up at 9:04 in the morning, which gave me roughly enough time for me to get ready for my African politics class today at 9:30 in the morning. Getting dressed, setting up the laptop. I had to briefly close this screen for roughly around 20 minutes, I would say, because apparently at some point while I was sleeping, the battery, the charge port, got misaligned and stopped charging, causing my laptop to be dead by the time I woke up. So I had to charge my laptop so that I wouldn't be in danger of having it power off instantly upon the charge port getting misaligned. I tried to study for my Spanish test by listening to a video on, I think, basic Spanish phrases while I slept and while I was falling asleep. On this mattress with this blanket. And before that, excuse me, this is based off of me working on my listening comprehension primarily through a YouTube video from the channel Spanish Like a Pro. And this I wrote down in the last minutes before the Spanish test, in which I basically tried to see what vocab I could remember from lessons 13 and 14 before the start of the exam, or they'll examine in Spanish. I still have that gallon of milk in my mini fridge, and that's from where I got the milk. It didn't seem the slightest bit curdled when I saw myself pouring it. This is where I'm at currently in regards to the task set for my Rise of the Phoenix Cult evolvable building event. I don't believe I already have this one. I was able to get the daily exclusive building for yesterday. I just got a new province expansion. Which you get periodically from completing provinces. And I used it so I could make space to build the ancient grounds. Even though I, at this point, do not need more cultural buildings. If anything, I might need possibly space for improvements to the armory. I think I'm nearing the point in which you start needing orcs in order to negotiate within provinces. Even though the orcs don't come in until, obviously, this chapter. So at some point in the near future, it would probably be useful to upgrade the armories. I'm pretty much at that point where I should start switching to a fairy settlement rather than a dwarven settlement. And besides, the dwarves probably fit more with a human city rather than an elven city. The dwarves seem, based on this game's depiction of them, highly industry-based. They don't seem to be very harmonious with nature. Though it does look like the steel manufactory does look like a rock in a sort of sense. I finally got to see chapter 9 of Kayla, I believe it's pronounced, the Skybound Ebony, or Ebony. That's the name of the story which I've been following checking out every now and then for new chapters, at least once a week, probably more often than that, for months now. It's just my good fortune that a new province, a new tournament just started when I got back from art class, in which I turned in my completed color wheel and spent basically the entire class gessoing my now fired ceramic shoe. It was significantly harder than it was before, and sounded different to impacts against it. Kind of like some kind of instrument or something. I want to say cowbell, but it probably isn't that. Probably something similar to it. And despite me feeling a little groggy at the time, I think possibly due to a combination of the messed up sleep schedule and all the effort I put into doing well in that Spanish exam, for the listening, there was a listening section, followed by a reading comprehension section, followed by a writing section, during which I essentially made advice about the kind of services a new mall should have, though theoretically, in reality, it might be difficult to open a new mall, given how shopping has become increasingly digital-based rather than physical-based over the years recently. And there's still the ongoing coronavirus pandemic to be concerned about. I placed this order at around 9 p.m. Because I fell asleep shortly after my art class, at the end of which I got spooked by the heat gun, which is really meant to strip paint, as my art professor told me as I was leaving. Because I asked about that tool. I was able to tell based on observation alone that you were supposed to use it to dry the gesso. And when I went to do that, at the end of class, I got spooked by the heat gun, thinking the air it was going to blow from it was going to be so hot that it would burn this hand that I was using to hold my shoe. And I accidentally dropped the shoe a bit, which caused a corner of the sort of flap on the top of the shoe to break off. I believe it was the left corner or at least left when the shoe is in a position so that the tip of it points straight at you, the tip where your toes go, generally speaking. I recall briefly waking up at around 7 p.m., but then I fell back asleep for about an hour, and so I ended up missing dinner tonight. And so that's why I placed the order for tracks. For my African politics class, we talked about the informal sector, which the professor defined as basically any kind of means of making an income. I believe I'm paraphrasing here. Any means of making an income that isn't officially recorded by the government. So this could be anything from, as I said when I basically asked for clarification on a definition I came up with for the informal sector, if it can really be anything from growing and selling bananas, as I said, to drug dealing and prostitution. And the professor said yes. And at the end of class, I had a question in which I asked if the informal sector is primarily good or primarily bad, which the professor said was a good question, to which he said that it's irrelevant, the question, because the informal sector is a necessity, because oftentimes it can be people's only ways of earning a living and providing for their families, which is something I believe I said while asking that end of class question as a potential reason as to why the informal sector may be primarily good. And my reasoning as for why it may be primarily bad, flipping onto that side of the coin, was that some things on the informal sector can cause considerable harm, such as the drug dealing, prostitution aspects of it. There's also trying to make medicine making counterfeit money, poaching body parts of endangered species such as rhino horns, human trafficking, making and selling suicide vests, making and selling firearms, selling dangerous chemicals, hitman services, and I could probably go on and on that, but you get the point. And by definition, anything that's criminal activity generally can't be recorded by the government. And they're criminal activities because they're considered harmful to society as a whole. And yeah, while there are considerably harmful aspects to those activities, that's why they tend to be more prevalent in areas with more ineffective governments. Because it shows the ineffectiveness of that government. As one of the government's duties are supposed to be to protect people from criminal activity, or extending the scope, protecting people from having to resort to criminal activities in order to earn a living and provide for their families. And when those things aren't done, to an acceptable extent, it shows that the current government in place is not very effective in doing what it's supposed to do for its people who set that government up in the first place. Which, generally speaking, has always been the case throughout human history. It's just that in the case of monarchies and other systems of governments that weren't democracies, most likely an army, some kind of military force was developed, conquered land, and set up a government that had jurisdiction over the lands they managed to seize control of through military force, most likely, I would say. That was actually a bit of a loss of sky essence. Well, this one is quite likely to give me 10 knowledge points. Speaking of which, it was in that chapter 9 that I got an update, a height update of 140 feet. Based on an earlier chapter's description of someone being able to fit inside the ear canal, I initially thought it was in the ballpark of several hundred, like something like 500. Or something truly extraordinary like that. Because that story's rarely provided a height update. Probably because it's probably going back to that principle of show don't tell. Oh, and after going to the Harrison building to go to tracks on the first floor, or I believe ground floor if you're in the UK, I made a quick stop at at the Nest, in order to buy 2 Rockstar X-Durance energy drinks. One kiwi strawberry flavored and the other cotton candy flavored. During which I thought about the increase in hate crimes against Asians, thinking about how bad it must be to live in fear just because of essentially what you were given through random chance. After all, nobody comes into this world determining characteristics like race.